It was supposed to be a calm discussion on CNN's Prime Focus, moderated by none other than actor George Clooney. The set gleamed under perfect studio lighting, polished floors, sleek glass tables, and a backdrop showing the U.S. Capitol bathed in deep blue. It was the kind of environment built for control, poise, and quiet intellect. But tonight, the calm was an illusion. Sitting in one chair was actor George Clooney, composed, dignified, his signature silver hair untouched by the heat in the room. Next to him, American actor Jonathan Roumie, known for his grounded portrayals and earnest advocacy, adjusted his jacket, a simple cross necklace visible just above his neckline. He looked calm, but anyone watching could see the tension in his fingers, the way they gripped his notes a second too long. The topic: authentic leadership and public trust in an increasingly fractured society. The guest panel, a mix of journalists and cultural commentators. The moment already too charged to stay polite. George Clooney opened the segment with his usual polished delivery. Tonight we ask, what does leadership truly look like in America? And who genuinely represents the everyday person? Joining us is Jonathan Roumie, an actor many call the face of a new generation seeking authenticity. But is he truly in touch with the average American? Or is this just another performance? He glanced at the camera. Jonathan, thank you for being here. Jonathan Roumie smiled, nodding respectfully. Thanks for having me, George. At first, it was civil. He spoke of the human experience of empathy, of seeking common ground beyond the headlines, but it didn't take long for the shift. One of the commentators, a seasoned progressive voice, leaned forward and smirked. Jonathan, you speak of connecting with America, but when was the last time you weren't recognized in a grocery store or had to worry about a single mom working 2 jobs? You don't represent them. You're not even close. The crowd in the studio murmured, a few claps breaking through. Jonathan's jaw tightened slightly. With all due respect, he began, but George Clooney cut in with that disarming, trademark grin. Jonathan, he said softly, some would argue you've built your career in a bubble. Red carpet events, talk show circuits, exclusive industry galas. Do you think the average American sees you as one of them, or as another celebrity mouthpiece? The question hit harder than the tone suggested. It wasn't the first time Jonathan had been called out for his celebrity, but this time, the stage was national, and the audience included millions at home. He didn't flinch, not yet, but his silence was brief, and in it, the room waited. The camera zoomed in just slightly, catching the faint shift in his expression, an almost imperceptible narrowing of the eyes, a breath held in the chest. This wasn't going to be a regular Q&A. This was the beginning of a storm. Jonathan Roumie's hands rested gently on the glass table. His posture was upright, measured, almost statuesque. Yet behind his composed appearance, his mind worked rapidly, analyzing, preparing. He had been underestimated before, but not tonight, not again. He turned toward George, his voice level, but laced with quiet force. George, it's always interesting to me how the people who spend the most time inside news studios and celebrity circles are the quickest to accuse others of being out of touch. The audience gave a restrained reaction, some impressed murmurs, others waiting for the blowback. He continued, eyes shifting toward the progressive commentator who'd questioned his authenticity earlier. You asked me when I last rode the subway? Last month, New York City. I took it to meet a group of mothers in Queens who've been begging their local leaders to do something about gang violence on their block. Do you know what they told me? They don't care if someone wears a designer suit or drives a Tesla. They care if someone actually listens to their humanity. The studio quieted for a moment. George Clooney, ever the poised mediator, tried to redirect. But some critics say your public persona doesn't match the reality of Hollywood. You speak about everyday families, but you're part of a system that often feels disconnected. Jonathan didn't let him finish. He leaned in, voice rising slightly, his tone sharpened, but never theatrical. They say that because they've never truly listened to the people these public platforms are meant to reach. I've sat at kitchen tables in rural Ohio, small-town Pennsylvania, and yes, even in the South Bronx. And what I hear is the same. People are tired of polished speeches and media arrogance. They want voices who don't flinch when the questions get uncomfortable. Then he turned directly to the camera, and they're watching right now. The shift in the room was sudden. Even George raised an eyebrow, sensing he'd awakened something larger. The audience, which had tilted against him minutes ago, seemed to pause, drawn in, if not yet persuaded. The progressive commentator fired back. You're an actor, Jonathan. You've lived a life largely within the entertainment industry. You weren't raised in hardship. How can you claim to understand it? Jonathan Roumie's face didn't change, but his eyes locked with the speaker's. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon. My father worked 2 jobs. My mother never finished college. I've seen bills pile up on the counter. I've seen my parents stress over the price of heating oil. Don't mistake my profession for ignorance. And don't assume pain comes with a publicist. That line hit hard. There was a collective reaction from the audience, an audible shift. Some clapped, others simply watched, unsure whether they were witnessing a defense or a declaration. George tried once more to reset. Let's take a step back. But Jonathan leaned closer to the mic, his voice lowering, eyes fierce. I'm here because too many people with real voices are drowned out by those who think they own the conversation. I don't care if I'm 30 or 60. I care if I'm saying what others are too afraid to. The silence that followed was thick with tension and respect. George Clooney sat back, the controls subtly slipping from his hands. And Jonathan, he wasn't done. He had just started taking the studio apart, word by word. The studio lights hummed above, casting a warm but artificial glow over the polished desk between actor Jonathan Roumie and actor George Clooney. The tension hadn't left. It had simply taken a different form, simmering now beneath the surface like a low flame. Jonathan adjusted the mic pinned to his jacket and smiled. Not the polite kind, but a calculated one. He leaned in slightly and with a calm, almost surgical tone, asked the question no one expected. George, when was the last time you walked into a grocery store without someone recognizing you or your paycheck covering it? The words hung in the air, slicing through the usual banter of celebrity debate like a scalpel. George blinked, surprised. The audience, momentarily unsure how to react, fell into a stunned silence. Jonathan didn't stop. I'm not saying it to mock you. I'm saying it because the people I speak to, the families watching this show from their living rooms, they can't relate to polished scripts or curated outrage. They relate to empty refrigerators and rent due dates. His voice wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. He wasn't defending an administration this time. He wasn't even defending himself. He was holding up a mirror. George recovered with a practiced nod. Jonathan, this isn't about personal circumstances. It's about facts, about truth, about public discourse. Jonathan's eyes sparkled, not with defiance, but with focus. Exactly. So let's talk truth. You say I'm out of touch, but I spent my weekends reading stories, connecting with communities, trying to understand the fabric of this nation long before I had a significant platform. I know the smell of a truck cabin at 5 a.m. and the silence of a father praying his credit card works at the pharmacy. That's not out of touch. That's America. There it was, the audience stirred, some even clapping softly. It wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about something deeper. Jonathan wasn't just arguing. He was reminding them why they were watching in the first place. George shifted in his seat, his expression unreadable. Do you really believe one person's experience or an actor's perspective is enough to speak for a country? Jonathan nodded. Not one experience, but when you listen, really listen to the voices the media drowns out, you begin to understand. And I have. His tone lowered into something closer to a challenge. So if we're going to talk about being out of touch, let's start by asking how many elites sit at this desk and pretend to know what Americans feel without ever hearing their stories. The studio audience erupted, not in chaos, but in unexpected applause. Jonathan sat back, calm, unshaken. He hadn't raised his voice once, but he had landed a blow no shouting match could match. And for the first time in that segment, George didn't have a comeback ready. George Clooney leaned forward, fingers steepled, his tone measured. Jonathan, passion doesn't equal accuracy. You've painted a compelling picture, but addressing national challenges isn't about sentiment. It's about evidence, about practical solutions. Can you tell us factually how you believe we solve issues like economic strain, social division, and the education crisis? Or are you just here to criticize the elite? Jonathan Roumie's posture didn't shift, but his eyes narrowed with purpose. Criticizing elites isn't my mission. It's my context. And yes, I can speak to all three, not with policy papers, but with human experience. He turned slightly toward the camera. Economic strain. We start by valuing honest work, by empowering local communities, not just distant corporations. That's how you bring back dignity. Social division. We stop telling people what to think and start listening to why they hurt. That's how you build bridges. Education. He let a beat pass. Parents should have a say in what their kids are taught, not just distant bureaucrats. George interrupted. That's a nice sentiment, but parents aren't curriculum experts. You're fueling a culture war. Jonathan didn't flinch. I'm reclaiming parental involvement. You can call that a culture war. I call it community. The room buzzed again. The back and forth was escalating, but not into chaos, into clarity. Two worldviews clashing under stage lights. George pressed further. You talk about community, but what about global responsibility, environmental stewardship? Don't you believe in science? Jonathan smiled just slightly. Of course I do. I also believe in American ingenuity and responsible choices, but crippling local businesses with regulations while bigger polluters continue unchecked is not saving the planet. It's economic self-harm. The audience reacted, some murmurs, a few claps, others skeptical silence. But no one was bored. Jonathan wasn't just defending a side, he was shaping a moment. George's tone shifted. You're an actor, Jonathan. Some would say too idealistic to understand the long-term consequences of these positions. That was the opening he was waiting for. He leaned in, his voice smooth, almost cold. And some would say being a seasoned celebrity doesn't mean being wiser, just more practiced at excuses. The audience gasped, then clapped loudly. George straightened. He'd been in thousands of interviews, but now for the first time he looked like a man unsure of the next move. Jonathan, by contrast, remained composed. Experience is valuable, he said, but only when paired with courage. I may be an actor, but I don't hide behind scripts or panels. I face the people. I listen. I fight. A camera panned across the audience, some nodding, some stunned, all alert. He turned to George one last time. So go ahead, call me too idealistic, but don't forget who's really out of touch. It wasn't just a response, it was a warning. George Clooney sat still, but his silence was telling. Jonathan's final jab about being out of touch had landed. The audience, always quick to pick up on shifts in power, responded with a tension that felt almost electric, half uncomfortable, half intrigued. He tried to regain his footing. Let's move on, he said, attempting neutrality. Jonathan, some claim your direct style is divisive. Are you really bringing people together or just playing to the cameras? Jonathan folded his hands, his voice calm and unshaken. I'm not here to be polite. I'm here to be honest. America doesn't need another carefully rehearsed celebrity opinion. It needs someone who says what millions are thinking but are too afraid to say. There was a slight stir in the audience. A few heads nodded slowly. The momentum had shifted, and Jonathan knew it. You think this is about style, he asked? It's about substance. If being strong is aggressive, then fine. Call me aggressive, but don't confuse conviction with cruelty. George raised an eyebrow, trying again. Conviction can be dangerous when it silences nuance. Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes sharp. And nuance can be cowardice when it excuses inaction and apathy. That hit deeper than expected. The audience murmured louder this time. He wasn't just rebutting George. He was reframing the rules of the conversation. You talk about unity, he continued, voice rising slightly. But what kind of unity are we supposed to rally around? The kind that ignores small towns, that mocks faith, that tells blue-collar workers their pain is just statistics? George interjected. No one is mocking pain, but he didn't stop. I've sat with single moms who can't afford eggs. I've met veterans who feel forgotten. I've seen teenagers in public schools who can't name a single historical figure, but know every identity acronym on the planet. You call that progress? A pause. His words lingered, uncomfortable, but undeniable. George's tone softened. Jonathan, you speak passionately, but how do you ensure you're not fueling division? Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. By reminding people that truth isn't hate, that standards aren't an oppression, that America was built on hard truths, not soft lies. One woman in the crowd stood and clapped. Others followed. It wasn't a thunderous standing ovation, but it was honest, and George knew it. He looked down at his notes, hesitating before his next question. Jonathan sat taller. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a shift in public perception. Live, unfiltered, unspun. He wasn't just holding his ground, he was changing the ground altogether. And as the studio lights beamed down, even the production crew exchanged glances. Something real was unfolding, and Jonathan was steering it. George Clooney cleared his throat, visibly trying to regain control of the room. The small ripple of applause had faded, but the energy remained thick in the air. He adjusted his pen, his composure cracking just enough for the cameras to catch it. Jonathan, he began again, softer this time. You've made your stance clear, but some argue your views come from a place of celebrity privilege, that your sharp words dismiss the experiences of others. Jonathan didn't flinch. George, I didn't grow up in Hollywood. I wasn't handed a legacy. I grew up in a middle-class New Hampshire family. My dad fixed cars, my mom worked nights. I earned my place, not because of who I knew, but because I never quit. He leaned forward, his voice calm but grounded with steel. The real privilege, it's thinking the only way to be compassionate is to agree with the elite narrative. The real courage is standing against it. George paused, because for a second, even he couldn't refute it. I've worked with actors, producers, public figures, he said carefully, but few talk like you. Jonathan smirked. Maybe that's the problem. A few audience members chuckled. One cameraman, barely off frame, shook his head like he was witnessing something he hadn't seen in years. Authenticity. George, still trying to recover, pivoted. Let's talk about the specific problems. You mentioned forgotten towns and failing schools. What would you advocate for differently? Jonathan didn't miss a beat. Empower parents and communities, not broken systems. Let them choose what's best for their kids, not force them into failing schools just because of their zip code. You talk about justice, start with education, start with dignity. George nodded, but his next move was sharper. But when you speak with this fire, critics say you polarize the nation, that you draw lines instead of building bridges. Jonathan Roumie's expression hardened, his eyes locking with his. Sometimes, George, the truth is the line, and if speaking it divides us, maybe it's because someone's been lying too long. That landed harder than even she expected. The crowd went still. Even those who had debated him now leaned forward, not to challenge, but to understand. There was something happening here that no script could predict. George glanced to the producer off stage. They were over their segment time, but he didn't cut him off. He knew this wasn't just a segment anymore. It was a moment. Jonathan turned slightly toward the audience now. You say I'm harsh, that I draw lines. Maybe, but lines define values, and I'm here to say, if defending American values makes me the enemy of elites, then I'll carry that title proudly. George sat back, no longer interrupting. For once, he just listened. George folded his hands, clearly measuring his next words, but Jonathan beat him to it. You asked earlier if I'm connected to the people, he said, standing now, voice even. I'll tell you who I'm connected to. The single mother who works 2 jobs and still gets called selfish because she wants school choice for her kids. The truck driver who's never been to Hollywood but pays the price every time it fails to see him. The veterans who fought overseas and come home to red tape and neglect. That's who I speak for. A hush swept through the room. No quips, no political posturing, just raw conviction. George tried to interject, but Jonathan kept going, measured, firm, and sharper with every word. You know what disconnects Hollywood from real Americans, George? Arrogance. The kind that tells people they don't understand the system when they live under its weight every day. George leaned forward. But what about unity, Jonathan? Don't you think tone matters? He nodded slowly. Tone matters, but truth matters more. I don't speak to offend. I speak to wake people up. If that makes me the lightning rod, so be it. His words hung in the air like a bell that had just been rung. And then it happened. Something rare in modern TV silence. Not from awkwardness, but awe. Even the skeptical studio staff stopped what they were doing. You could feel the gravity shift. George blinked, then exhaled a soft, almost reluctant laugh. You're a lot more composed than people give you credit for, Jonathan. Jonathan shrugged. They mistake clarity for aggression. That's their problem. From the back row, someone whispered, he's not like the rest. And he wasn't. He didn't pander. He didn't soften. He exposed. And in doing so, he had flipped the entire segment on its head. George cleared his throat again. Well, Jonathan, I think you have made more than your point tonight. Jonathan nodded, looking right into the camera now. I hope I did, because too many Americans are being talked about, but not talked to. That ends now. And with that, the lights above seemed to shine just a bit brighter. Not because of the set, but because for the first time in a long time, someone in that studio wasn't reading a script. He was writing his own. As the tension in the room finally settled, actor George Clooney leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table as if weighing his next move carefully. You've certainly challenged a lot tonight, Jonathan saw, he said, but before we wrap, let me ask, what do you really want from all this? What's your end game as an actor speaking so boldly? Jonathan didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, his voice softer now, but every bit as resolute. I want truth to matter again. I want people in this country to feel seen, not by politicians, not by celebrities, but by their neighbors and their leaders. I want voices that don't just speak in sound bites, but act with backbone. He paused, then delivered the line that made the entire studio and later the nation sit up straight. And if that means standing alone in rooms like this, facing people who roll their eyes or write me off as too idealistic, too earnest, or too out of touch with Hollywood, then I'll stand alone because this country is worth it. There was no music cue, no applause sign, but the audience, both in studio and watching from home, felt it. The room wasn't just quiet, it was holding its breath. George adjusted his tie. There's a lot of people who would argue that your tone contributes to the very division you criticize. Jonathan smiled slightly. Sometimes a broken system needs a louder voice to wake it up. You can't fix a fire with whispers. At that moment, one of the producers off stage mouthed to George, "We're running over, but don't cut yet." George hesitated, then turned back to Jonathan. "One last question," he said, lowering his voice. "If a studio executive or even a major network head were sitting in that chair instead of me, what would you say to them?" The entire studio seemed to freeze. Even the camera zoomed in tighter. Jonathan didn't blink. "I'd ask them one question," he said slowly. "When you look into the eyes of an American family that can't afford groceries, whose son can't get into a decent school, whose daughter is scared to walk home at night, do you still believe your current narratives truly serve them?" He let the question hang untouched, unanswered, because it wasn't just meant for them, it was meant for all of America. And that's when the screen faded to black. No outro music, no witty summary, just one bold voice in a nation that had just been forced to listen. The moment Jonathan's words echoed through the studio, there was no denying it. Something had shifted. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward TV silence. It was a stunned, thoughtful stillness, as if the entire room had been jolted into clarity. George Clooney, ever the composed anchor, tried to reassert the reins. "That's a powerful question," he said carefully. "But critics would say your approach is combative, even reckless for an actor." Jonathan didn't flinch. "Truth isn't always gentle, George, and real leadership doesn't come wrapped in polite applause. We've tried whisper diplomacy. We've tried soft-spoken celebrity politics. Where did that get us? Higher prices, societal fragmentation, and a generation that doesn't even recognize their own country." He sat straighter, his green eyes piercing through the lens. "We are not the land of passive decline. We are the land of bold ideas, of strong voices. And if that voice has to come from an actor who's tired of being lied to, so be it." In homes across the country, viewers leaned forward. In diners in Texas, in apartments in New York, and in farmhouses across Iowa, people were watching, some nodding silently, others debating aloud, but none could deny he had taken command of the room. Clooney shifted again, trying to break his rhythm. "Do you really believe your voice, as an actor, is ready to lead this kind of discourse? Many would argue experience in governance still matters." Jonathan arched a brow. "Experience without accountability is just ego in a suit. My generation grew up watching public figures and politicians bankrupt futures they'd never have to live through. We're not just ready to lead, we have to lead because no one else is going to clean up the mess." Behind the cameras, one crew member whispered to another, "He's not just making a point, he's building a movement." The hashtag Roumie Real Talk began trending in within minutes. At that very moment, across town in a major studio executive's office, an assistant entered, tablet in hand. "Sir," he said to the executive, "you'll want to see this." The executive looked up from his notes, eyebrows raised. "Another celebrity scandal?" "No, sir," the aide replied. "It's a storm, and his name is Jonathan Roumie." Back in the studio, Jonathan didn't know what impact his words would carry beyond the walls of that stage, but in his gut, he felt it. This wasn't just a moment, it was a beginning. The moment the cameras went dark, George Clooney sat back in his chair, visibly exhausted. Producers scurried across the studio floor, some exchanging glances that said everything. They had just witnessed something bigger than ratings. Jonathan stood up slowly, his hands no longer clenched but steady. His crossed necklace caught the reflection of the studio lights as he turned toward George. "Thanks for having me," he said, his voice low but calm, like a fighter who had landed every punch he needed to and didn't need to swing again. George hesitated, then offered a quiet nod. "You know this is going to go everywhere." Jonathan gave a tight smile. "It already has." Outside the studio, a wave had begun. News clips, reaction videos, think pieces. Everyone wanted a piece of what had just happened. MSNBC called it an alarming rise in aggressive celebrity activism. Fox News called it the most important voice of his generation. CNN couldn't decide what to call it. But what no one could deny was the impact. Clips of his line, "Experience without accountability is just ego in a suit," spread like wildfire. On TikTok, teens were lip-syncing his rebuttals. On Twitter, journalists debated whether he had finally cracked the celebrity echo chamber. On Reddit, a thread titled "Jonathan Roumie just roasted George Clooney into the ground" hit the front page within hours. And back in New Hampshire, Jonathan's wife watched it all unfold. She wasn't a politician. She didn't need to be. She just stood quietly by his side when he returned home that night. "You did it," she said simply. Jonathan leaned his head against her shoulder. "No," he replied. "We started it." The next morning, headlines flooded every platform. Jonathan Roumie dares to ask what no one else will. A new voice of authenticity or a dangerous force. America just met its future, and he's not mincing words. But while the pundits argued, one thing became clear. Jonathan had struck a nerve. Not just with George, not just with the media, but with America itself. He had asked a question, he had drawn a line, and in doing so, he had lit a fire. What happened next? That would be up to the people watching. But one thing was certain, Jonathan Roumie was no longer just an actor, he was a reckoning. Sometimes it takes just one voice to shift the balance of a room, one question to silence the noise, one man to hold his ground against a legacy of power. Tonight, Jonathan Roumie wasn't just an actor or a name in the headlines, he was a mirror, reflecting the frustration of millions who feel unheard. He didn't raise his voice, he raised the standard. George Clooney thought he could frame the narrative. However, Jonathan reshaped the nation's focus. Whether you agreed with him or not, you felt something. That's what real dialogue is. Not rehearsed scripts, but raw truth. This wasn't just a debate. It was about who truly represents America. Thank you for watching my channel, which challenges what you think you know at every moment. Remember, in a world filled with noise, the truth still echoes on.